One of the crew members will be able to point them out to you guys. So we guys at disembark in the vessel. There'll be no smoking on board. Please do not smoke nor vape on or inside of the vessel. If you guys need to make or take a phone call, please do so inside the salon. It goes as well for loud conversations. If you guys are going to have a conversation during this cruise, please take that inside the salon. I'm not saying that you guys can't talk in general. Just if you guys are going to have a conversation, go inside the salon. For anybody that's have a problem with another passenger on this vessel, please reach out to a crew member and we'll be able to take care of the situation for you guys. At the end of the tour, I do ask for everybody to remain in your seat, just like an airplane coming in for landing. For safety reasons, remain in your seat. And I will come back out on the mic like I am now, and I will let you guys know when it's safely to do so, to stand up and exit the vessel. Now it's time for me to hand the mic over to your creepy tour guide tonight. And everyone, help give a warm welcome to Mr. Nick.
Welcome aboard the Creepy Cruise. I'm not going to do that the whole time, don't worry. Oh, you want me to? I don't think I can sustain that for 90 minutes, to be honest. But I do like to open my tour with a weird, goofy voice. It's different every time. I'm kind of workshopping it. But anyway, welcome aboard Chicago's Emerald Lady. My name is Nick, as Captain Diamond just introduced me. So we're going to talk a whole lot about, not just, there'll be a lot of creepy stuff, yes, but also just a lot of weird stories throughout Chicago's history. A lot of stories of murder, death, strange happenings, and of course a lot of ghost stories too. Chicago, of course, is very well known for a lot of its architecture, restaurants, museums, all that jazzy stuff being experienced in the daytime, but it's also got a very dark history that's sort of hidden away behind that glitz and glamour. And one of Chicago's earliest events here is also one of its darkest, and it happened right here near where our dock is located. For this first story, though, I've got to set the stage for you, because this area looked significantly different in the time period this story takes place. So we're going back to the early 1800s, when Chicago wasn't even officially incorporated yet as a city, but there did exist a settlement here and a fort, Fort Dearborn. It stood right there, right in front of where our boat's currently sitting. That time was also where the mouth of the Chicago River used to be. All this land on either side of us here is landfill. It didn't exist back in the early 1800s, so the fort was built to strategically defend what was then the mouth of the river. But the settlers that lived in this area back in those days, they didn't live alone here. They also still shared it with those native tribes that lived here long before anyone else arrived. But it was sort of a tenuous peace, right? A lot of tensions there. And the British, they were very keen to stoke these tensions at any opportunity they could get, because we were still at odds with them at this time. But then the War of 1812 breaks out, right? And we're fighting the British all over again. Most of that fighting, though, is contained on the East Coast, away from Chicago, and also up in Canada. But the Potawatomi tribe that lived in this area decided to make their move on Fort Dearborn as we were fighting the British on the East Coast. They attacked some farmers south of the city here, south of Fort Dearborn, killing those farmers, a few of them down there, 2 miles away. Well, the garrison of Fort Dearborn realizes that they're not about to get reinforced because of all the fighting that's going on the East Coast. But their garrison is only a few dozen soldiers. There are hundreds of native warriors in this area, and they quickly realize this situation is pretty bad. We got to get the heck out of here. So they started organizing an evacuation of Fort Dearborn to just clear out and wait for the whole war to blow over before coming back. Well, the thing about their evacuation, though, was they had gone back on an agreement they had with the Potawatomi that basically ensured them safe passage to and from the fort. That agreement was something like giving them all their surplus goods, and as they were conducting their evacuation here, the Potawatomi warriors closed in, over 500 of them, on the dozens of settlers and soldiers that were trying to leave the area. Well, it's called the Battle of Fort Dearborn. Oh my gosh, can't say my words right now. It's been a long day, folks. I'll get through it though, don't worry. Anyway, the Battle of Fort Dearborn is what it's called, but it was more like a massacre, because those people were caught unawares in the midst of their evacuation, and despite their best efforts, they were slaughtered in a matter of about 15 minutes. They put up as good a fight as they could, but ultimately, a lot of them were left dead right here at this spot, which was at that time the mouth of the Chicago River. Well, given that they were just sort of slaughtered so unceremoniously, and those that were captured alive, well, they faced some of the most torturous and miserable conditions in captivity that you could possibly imagine. A lot of ghost stories have followed in the wake of this, because a lot of those people were ultimately buried in unmarked graves around this area. Many of them still probably have human remains here underneath all these skyscrapers that exist to this day. In fact, one of those unmarked graves was excavated back in the 1980s for one of these towers. So a lot of the things that happen around this area are usually involving the sights and sounds of the Battle of Fort Dearborn. So maybe you'll find yourself walking across the Michigan Avenue Bridge one night and you hear the sounds of a fierce battle being fought somewhere nearby, but obviously you don't see anything actually happening. Maybe you will, though. Some people have seen native tribesmen and American settlers locked in ferocious combat around this area, still fighting the Battle of Fort Dearborn all these years later, their restless souls still trying to find a satisfactory conclusion so they can finally find their rest. But it's not just the sounds of battle, it's also the sounds of a drumbeat you might hear in this area at night walking through the lonely streets of downtown and wee hours there. This drum beat is coming from that poor little drummer boy who was stationed at Fort Dearborn and perished in the battle. He's still beating his drum, hoping maybe that his fellow soldiers will finally win that battle and they can all find their peace in the afterlife. But unfortunately, that peace is never going to come. So up ahead of us here, we got the Trump Tower off to our right, and creeping into view just past the Trump Tower, you're going to start seeing two buildings identical. They're twins. They got these curvy balconies up there. They're part of a complex called Marina City. So Marina City, the two towers are residential. People have lived there since 1967. That means that people have also died in those apartments over the years. And so the entire Marina City complex has been plagued by numerous ghost stories over the years. First one I'll tell you about is a jazz musician. He played the saxophone. He lived up there in one of the Marina Towers. Well, one day he passed away in his apartment, but he never stopped playing his saxophone. A lot of people who live up there or visit the Marina Towers, they'll find they're walking through the halls at night long after anyone should be playing a saxophone. And nonetheless, they'll hear the sounds of one drifting through the hollows of the Marina Towers. That saxophone is still serenading the residents up there to this day. Beyond that, though, there was a movie theater right behind those two towers. And the manager of that movie theater was brutally stabbed to death in the 1970s, and her murder was never solved. Well, there's been sightings of one of those pesky women dressed all in white with the raven black hair floating through the walls of this building in the wee hours of the night. There's no real specific person connected to this woman in white. She sort of just floats through the hallways, not acknowledging anyone or anything, especially the walls. She just goes right through. Maybe she's the spirit of that movie theater manager who was brutally murdered and whose restless soul is still awaiting someone to solve her case. That's probably never going to happen, though, because the person of interest they had was found dead shortly after they were pretty sure they were about to arrest him for the deed. So it's likely that her case will never be solved, and so maybe this woman in white will be floating through the walls of Marina City for many years to come. But all right, the Chicago River is no stranger to disaster, and probably its greatest disaster ever occurred in 1915. A few sections of the river walk down on our left. About 100 years ago, 1915, there was a boat called the SS Eastland docked right here in the Chicago River. This thing was huge. It fit 2,000 people aboard. It was long enough to fit under two bridges at once. And in fact, one of these bridges overhead didn't exist at the time, so it was sort of parked in between two bridges. Very long, very tall boat. Well, that day in 1915 in July, while it was boarding thousands of people, it capsized and sank, killing over 800 of them. Now, we're going to get into the details of the SS Eastland disaster a little bit later in the cruise. We're going to pass this site the second time. I'll tell you more about what happened specifically when we do that. But for now, I want to fast forward 1 year, the aftermath of the Eastland disaster in 1916. There's over 800 corpses in the Chicago River. The city doesn't want them there for obvious reasons, so they're actually
this is one of the regular cruise that they do here in Chicago.
To cover all of these bodies down there. The river's not that deep. It's only about 18 to 24 feet deep at its deepest points. So they've got these contractors going down to the riverbed to cover these bodies, right? Well, one of these contractors was a guy named William Frenchy Deneau, and one day he was conducting one of his dives, and Frenchy finds something here in the depths of the river he was not expecting to find. He finds a one-man homemade submarine. Hi, you should have got a ticket. You could have been on the boat. He finds a one-man homemade submarine right here in the Chicago River, and inside there's a skeleton of a man and a dog. Now, they've been long dead at this point, but why were they right here where the SS Eastland had sank? Why did the guy bring his dog with him? Well, this is one thing that we may not ever get the answer to. But we do have sort of a paper trail for this submarine. First of all, the original owner of it, who was also the guy who built it, was a man named Wander Phillips. So he was sort of an inventor. He invented a lot of things relating to submersibles and diving suits. He even made headlines here in Chicago in the 1800s that read something like, "A crazy man is going to jump into Chicago River in an iron suit." So the evidence there is pretty strong that maybe it was him in the submarine. It was his submarine after all. But he died in 1876, and his submarine was found in 1916, so long after he passed away. Well, then the submarine falls under new ownership, a guy named Peter Nissing. And he was also an inventor, though his inventions were of dubious quality. I want you to imagine in your minds a watermelon, and then I want you to imagine that watermelon is big enough to fit a person inside. Peter designed a watercraft that looked very much like a watermelon, and to his credit though, he used it to sail across Lake Michigan and get to the other side in one piece, though his craft fell apart right as he got to shore, so it was a one-use thing. Well, this guy comes into ownership of the submarine, so maybe he's the one inside there when Frenchie finds it in the Chicago River. But no, Peter died in 1902, long before the submarine was later discovered here in the Chicago River. So after that, the paper trail goes cold. We don't know who comes under ownership of the submarine afterwards, and we never find out who was in that submarine the day Frenchie found it. So that dog, that guy, never identified, and Frenchie, he's sort of an opportunist. He took that submarine on tour and paid or charged 10 cents a pop to enter and go for a little ride. He even took the human and dog remains alongside with the submarine. But then one day, all of them, Frenchie, the submarine, the dog, and human remains, they all just disappeared without a trace. And this story has just sort of faded away into mystery. Speaking of mysteries, this site off to our right here is called Wolf Point. And today, 3 skyscrapers sit on this site. But for a long time, it was just a parking lot with nothing really here. Well, about 10 or so years ago, they began excavating this site for these buildings, but the excavation crews found something very interesting buried here at Wolf Point. A 1977 light blue Corvette, which was pretty in good shape despite the fact that it was buried, and then it was only slightly damaged by the excavation crews. Otherwise, it was in solid condition. So then we're left to wonder, why would somebody bury a pretty nice car here at Wolf Point in what seemed to be pretty good condition? Well, one of the things that we can speculate on is, well, maybe this thing was buried sometime in the 80s or 70s. Back in those days, there were a lot of rumors that the construction industry was sort of run by the mob, especially the excavation side of it. Maybe this was an insurance job, right? They dumped that car there to try to collect some insurance money. They never found any bodies, weapons, money, or drugs with the car. It was just the car. So no police investigation was conducted because there was no sign of foul play. Someone just buried a car here. Maybe there was something else involved. I'll let your imagination sort of run wild on this one. Either way, we had a pretty nice car just buried here at Wolf Point, and we'll probably never know the true reason why. Now that we're entering the North Branch of the Chicago River, we're going to discuss a few very famous mob-related hits that have occurred in Chicago, all on the north side over the years. The first one is going to involve the famous Depression-era bank robber called John Dillinger. Well, John Dillinger was on a pretty huge crime spree in the Depression era. He had become public enemy #1 by the federal government because he'd robbed over 24 banks, 4 police stations, and escaped jail twice. So he was the top guy on their hit list, and they actually ultimately created the FBI because of John Dillinger's crime spree. But to the public, Dillinger was more of a figure of fascination, right? They saw him more as like Robin Hood as opposed to somebody to be feared. And so he was actually quite popular with the people, and he also felt pretty much untouchable. With that in mind, in 1934, he comes to Chicago in the midst of a hot July, and he wants to go catch a show at the Biograph Theater on the north side. He doesn't want to go alone though, so he brings not 1, but 2 dates with him. One of them is a Romanian immigrant, and she's really keen to not get deported, so she hears that the federal government is offering a $5,000 reward for any information on the whereabouts of John Dillinger. She thinks, well, maybe I can collect the money and get citizenship if I tell them that Dillinger is going to be at the Biograph on that night in July. So as a sign to the agents that he was going to be inside, she wore a bright orange skirt, Well, they were very kind because they allowed Dillinger to enter the Biograph and watch the whole show that night. And then as he was coming out at about 11 p.m., they moved in to try and capture Dillinger. But he got the sense that something wasn't quite right. So first he tried to pull his gun out of his holster, but for whatever reason, he couldn't take it out. So instead he takes off running down an alleyway to the side of the Biograph. As he's running away, federal agents just throw caution to the wind. They don't want him to escape, so they just decide to shoot at him. They fire 4 shots. The first 3 graze Dillinger, but the 4th one pierces the base of his spinal column here and severs that spinal column, and he immediately falls flat on his face running down that dingy alleyway. Pretty unceremonious way to go out for public enemy number 1. But in a testament to how popular he was back then and how fascinated the public was with him, as a pool of blood is forming around John Dillinger's still warm body, people gather around and use whatever they can to collect bits of his blood as memorabilia and keepsakes. Maybe it'll be worth something someday, you know? That's just how crazy infatuated the public was with John Dillinger back then. But his death was ruled a justifiable homicide, because literally they murdered Dillinger. He was running away. They just decided not to capture him, but given his crime spree, they really didn't want to let him get away. But his ghost certainly feels like Dillinger has unfinished business because he's still hanging around the Biograph. Howdy. So most of the time people see Dillinger at the Biograph these days, he's recreating his fateful escape attempt down that alleyway next to the Biograph. So they'll take off running just like he had done for real, but every single time, just like happened in real life, he'll fall flat on his face in that dark, dingy alleyway, failing to escape the law. So pretty unceremonious way to go out, and pretty unceremonious way to live out the rest of all eternity, just constantly falling flat on your face in a dark, dingy alleyway. But that was the fate of John Dillinger. So this next one here involves somebody I'm sure all of you have heard of. If not John Dillinger, you've got to have heard of this guy. His name is Al Capone. And just like Dillinger, he was operating here in Chicago in the Depression era. He had a huge criminal organization. They had his hands in lots of different illicit business practices. But in 1929, Valentine's Day was approaching, and Dillinger was feeling the romanticness in the air. He had a rival here in Chicago named Bugs Moran, and he decided, you know what, Valentine's Day is approaching. I'm going to offer my rival, but also my good pal, Bugs Moran, a nice deal on some stolen caskets of whiskey. Well, this was the Prohibition era too, so this whiskey was illegal, so the idea of getting several caskets of it was probably pretty enticing to old Bugs Moran. He agreed to the meeting on the north side next to a parking structure. Well, Bugs Moran's crew arrives there at the meeting place, but Al Capone's men do not arrive. Instead, he's hired several out-of-town mobsters. He's had a couple of them dress up as police officers. They come to the meeting site, and instead of selling them some stolen whiskey, they round them up and line them up against a brick wall as if they're about to arrest them all. But they don't arrest these guys. As they're lined up against that brick wall, they all point their Tommy guns their way, let off over 70 rounds, just like that. That's what a Tommy gun sounds like. Don't you tell me different. Again? Okay. 70 times that happened. I'm not doing that 70 times, but that's what happened. It sounded just like that. These guys lined up against the brick walls. They're like, oh, I'm going to get arrested tonight. My wife's going to kill me. And then they promptly were killed. So 7 of them killed that night in what was later called the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. These guys, they just wanted to get some whiskey, and they died for it. So naturally, their spirits are not very happy here in the afterlife. No one wants to die right when they think they're about to get some whiskey. That's exactly what happened to these poor souls. Well, those guys that were dressed up as cops were also partnered with some guys who were just dressed in plain suits that night as part of the crew that Capone had hired. The guys dressed as cops now escorted the ones in suits out of the area as if they were being arrested, and they all escaped easily. Well, that site of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre has been the source of quite a few interesting happenings, specifically involving pets like dogs. A lot of people who've walked by where the massacre happened will say their dogs start acting weird, growling at things that they can't see, or just refusing to walk that way altogether. Beyond that, though, in the 1960s, Chicago was trying to distance itself from its gangland reputation. So they knocked down the building where the massacre happened. But anyone who took some of the bricks from that structure, knowing what happened there and thinking it'd be some kind of keepsake or something, Well, it didn't work out so well for them because it seems that the negative energy released that night just imbued itself into the very bricks of that building. Because anyone who took one home was either faced with financial ruin, serious illnesses, or personal or family tragedy. This whole thing was just ugly, and it was better that everybody just sort of try to forget about it rather than keep some of it for themselves. Well, beyond just the site where this happened, Al Capone himself was not immune to the hauntings that were left in its wake. So Bugs Moran, he had hoped, would be at the meeting that night, but he wasn't. His brother-in-law, Jimmy Clark, though, he was there, and he was one of the 7 that were killed by Al Capone's men. Well, Jimmy Clark was pretty furious, especially at Capone, for what had happened to him, so he chose to haunt Capone for the rest of his days. And he followed Capone wherever he went. When Capone was locked up for a concealed weapons charge while he was in prison, the night watchman would say that every single night without fail, Capone would shout into the darkness, "Leave me alone, Jimmy! Leave me alone, please!" But it never helped. Jimmy would not leave him alone. After he got out of prison on that charge, he approached his psychic to see if that would help, but nope, no cigar. Well, then he was locked up a second time for his infamous tax evasion charge that sent him all the way to Alcatraz prison. Well, Jimmy Clark followed him to Alcatraz, so if it's not bad enough you're locked up in Alcatraz, the ghost of Jimmy Clark will not leave you alone at all. No matter what you beg, how much you plead, Jimmy Clark did not leave him alone. And then Al Capone died at the age of 48, relatively young, but he was suffering from syphilis. And this syphilis had infested his brain to the point where, yes, he was facing syphilitic-induced insanity, which probably played a part in him seeing the ghost of Jimmy Clark. But I think we all know how vindictive gangsters and mobsters can be. I don't think it's a stretch to say that the ghost of Jimmy Clark had unfinished business with Al Capone. Al Capone himself has been cited haunting several locations in the Chicago area. Initially, it was the Lexington Hotel, but that's where he ran a lot of his operation from in his time here in Chicago. But that hotel was eventually knocked down, and then he moved on to his old yacht, the Duchess 3, which for a long time after Capone's death was left abandoned out on Lake Michigan. But people would say they'd see very strange things happening on that yacht after dark. They'd look through the portholes below deck, and they'd see flames emanating from inside the boat. But beyond that, on the top deck, they would see shadowy figures. One looked like a woman with a baby in her arms and sounded like she was crying. Well, then a figure looks like a huge guy, walks over, snatches that child, and throws the child overboard. The Duchess 3 was just plagued with weird events like this, but eventually it did come under new ownership, and much to their chagrin, these weird happenings still continue to take place. Either way, Al Capone certainly left his mark on Chicago in many ways, not just through his crime spree, but also through a lot of different weird paranormal entities taking their time doing creepy, weird things here in Chicago. And this next one, the last mobster story we're going to talk about, involves a young lady and a bit of a tragic love story. So this young lady was called Juanita Pappas. She lived here in Chicago in the 1960s, and she'd fallen in love with a guy named Frank the German Schweitz, who he was German, but he loved to hang out in Greektown where Becca lived. So she's fallen for this guy, but her family is distraught. The German is a notorious hitman for the Chicago Outfit, big criminal organization here in the city in the 1960s. He's worked his way up the ranks of the outfit as a guy who will not say no to a job. He's been in prison as many times as he is years old, 32, but every single time it seems like no charges stick. He's always got a get out of jail free card. He's also moved up so far in the ranks of the outfit that he's not only the personal bodyguard for his boss, Sam Giancana, but he's living at his house. Well, this guy is pretty bad news, at least that's what Becca's parents thought, so they begged her, "You gotta ditch this guy, it's not gonna end well." Unfortunately, they were right. One night, Becca was found floating in the Chicago River. A bullet had pierced her heart. An investigation is opened, of course. The German is questioned, but ultimately released, and no charges are ever filed. Her murder is never solved. That leaves us, obviously, a lot of room for speculation. Now you're going to have to sort of follow along here and just bear with me as I go through this speculative story here. There's a lot of speculation among leading mob experts that Becca's death may have had something to do with the death of Marilyn Monroe. So everyone thinks, of course, that Marilyn Monroe committed suicide. Apparently, the German had told Becca that the mob had actually killed her and then covered up her death to look like a suicide. Well, when the Chicago outfit found out that the German had spilled the beans, they told him that he had to silence Becca to maintain that cover-up. And that all sounds a little far-fetched, and I understand that it would. Consider this, first of all, that Marilyn Monroe's death was never officially ruled a suicide due to lack of evidence. Beyond that, she had a lot of connections with prominent families like the Kennedys and prominent leaders of criminal organizations like Sam Giancana, the German's boss. So there's no telling what information she may or may not have known about these people, about these families, about these criminal leaders. Maybe they deemed she knew too much and decided she had to be silenced. Whatever the German knew about her death and the death of Becca, he took that to his grave, so we're never really going to know the truth of why Becca was killed, and really the specific details around Marilyn Monroe's death either. But alright folks, right here is where I'm going to take my first break of the tour. There'll be a couple more throughout. This is a good time to get up, stretch your legs, use the restrooms, get another drink if you like. Believe me, if I could drink on the job, I would be drinking with you, but I'll probably do that after I get off because it has been a very long day. Either way, I'll be back soon to continue the cruise. For now, just enjoy the vibes, and I'll be back soon.
Okay, guys. I couldn't talk much while he was talking, so that's why I was in silence, because they have advised to not have conversation while they're doing their presentation. This is very nice cruise. I invite everybody to come to Chicago and to do any of these cruise, local cruise. It's very entertaining and it's nice. At nighttime it looks gorgeous. The city looks, to me, more pretty at nighttime than it is during the daytime. So it's a very nice short cruise, but it's good. I really enjoy it. I really enjoy this cruise. It's one of the many. They got many different type of cruise. So you have a choice. You don't have to stick with one cruise. It's different one. What is people interest that people should choose to do a cruise. But it's very nice. I really enjoying it. The night is very nice. It's really cool. I might go and visit our friend Santos. I don't know what time they're supposed to go, but I would like to see the place, what it looks like at nighttime. So we'll see. The different buildings. It's very pretty, and the weather is awesome. So it's a nice breeze. It's a very nice. Being over there.
Alright, let's see, 137. Okay, we got 137 people on board. I'm just counting how many people we got on board so I can tell the Grim Reaper how many souls he can collect later on. Anyway. Hey, well, you're a ginger? Is that what you just said? Oh, okay, so it's 136 souls because we got one ginger. Any other gingers want to make themselves known? Anyway, let's continue here before that goes off the rails. I just came up with that on the spot. We'll see how that goes over. Anyway, This next character I want to tell you about is a relatively new arrival to Chicago, but he's also not unique to Chicago. He's been seen all across the U.S., starting in 1967 in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Sometimes I get a reaction right after that, people who know who I'm talking about. But anyway, this character arrived in Chicago around 2011, sightings peaking around 2017. This figure is often described as about 7 feet tall or more, humanoid in shape, though having dark coloring, dark gray, black coloring, sometimes red, illuminated eyes, but probably the most distinctive feature of this creature is its massive pair of wings on its back. All across the United States, this creature has been dubbed the Mothman, and he has been sighted here in Chicago. Well, the Mothman often makes his time spending it near the water at night, where we just happen to find ourselves here on this cruise. So with that said, keep your eyes peeled on the rooftops in the sky for the Mothman. People who have encountered this creature have said, especially when they lock eyes with it, that it feels as though it's peering into the very depths of their soul, that the creature is discerning their thoughts, and that they're just paralyzed with fear. Sounds like a great guy. Beyond that, though, there have been numerous sightings in the Chicago area. One of my favorites, though, involves a guy just having a smoke here in the Loop. He's outside of a tavern having a smoke. He decides to look up, and he's pretty close to the Sears Tower, which is the tallest building in the city. We'll see it pretty soon. So he's having a smoke here. He looks up, and he's very convinced he sees a humanoid figure with huge wings perched up there on top of the Sears Tower. Well, then that thing launches itself off the building and soars off into the sky. Obviously, the lesson here is that whatever that guy was smoking is some pretty good stuff, and we all probably want a hit of it. Well, the Mothman, he hasn't been seen in a while, but I have a strong hankering that he'll make an appearance tonight. So keep an eye out, watch the skies, watch the rooftops. The Sears Tower will be coming into view just off to the left very soon. It seems to be a very favorite spot of his. So yeah, maybe you'll see the Mothman tonight. Who knows? Who knows? But all right, let's cruise, or we are cruising. I really don't have a choice in that matter. This is the South Branch of the Chicago River. That's where I'm trying to go with this. So the South Branch was turned into more of a canal than a natural river in the 1840s. This process claimed many lives. Thousands of laborers worked on it back in the 1840s. Most of them were Irish immigrants. A lot of them ended up buried at St. James Cemetery on the southwest side of the city. St. James is one of those cemeteries that is just plagued by all sorts of weird happenings throughout the years. One of the earliest stories happened in 1898. The story goes that there were these two musicians who had just finished off a gig that night, and apparently the gig had a very spooky theme, so they were feeling those spooky vibes, right? And they realized that they're not too far away from St. James Cemetery. So one of them tells the other guy, well, what if we spent the night at St. James Cemetery? That would just be so on theme for what we're doing tonight. There's always so many people yelling here at night. Anyway, back on track. I get distracted easily. Anyway, these guys decide, okay, we're going to spend a night at a cemetery. Great idea. So they're sleeping happy and soundly amongst the tombstones there. Then they get awoken by the sounds of galloping hooves and the rolling wheels of a cart. As they wake up with a start and look over, they see two pale white horses they say have light beaming out of their faces, and they're pulling a large black cart behind them. Well, this cart is approaching one of those mysterious women dressed all in white with a raven black hair who appears to be hailing the carriage. But as soon as it pulls up near her, she sinks into the ground and disappears, after which the carriage promptly vanishes into thin air as well. But then this kept happening over and over again throughout the whole night. Next morning, they decide, well, that was pretty weird. What if we go tell the police about this? Maybe they'll do something. They take the story to the police, and yeah, they don't do anything. The thing sounds crazy. So nothing happens, but we do have some speculation here about what this may have represented, right? Well, the first one is that this poor woman was at some point crushed by a cart, and as her restless soul is still trying to reach her destination, she's over and over again hailing this cart, only to be sunken back into the ground, just like she had been when this thing squashed her. The other possible explanation is that since this was at a cemetery and a priest lived at the cemetery, maybe this woman was involved in an indiscretionary act with that priest, and their eternal penance is to live out this scene over and over again as punishment for their indiscretion, whatever it was. Either way, that's not the only weird thing that's happened at the cemetery. Hooded figures that look a lot like monks have been seen at the cemetery, and even in 1977, the police chased some of them into the cemetery, but then they completely lost track of them. Even the trained police dogs couldn't pick up a scent. They just vanished into thin air. But one of the priests that lived there at the cemetery, he even attested to seeing these hooded figures at night, but it wasn't the only thing he would see when he looked out his window at the cemetery. He said he could see the ground raising and lowering, almost as if the earth was breathing on the cemetery grounds. That is all to say that this sounds like a great place to have a slumber party. I encourage all of you to spend the night at St. James Cemetery and get back to me and tell me what you see, because I'm not going to do it. But okay. We're here again on the South Branch. We're also very close to the site of where the Great Chicago Fire of 1871 happened. This fire obliterated over a third of Chicago. Over 17,000 buildings were destroyed in 1871. But despite the scale of the destruction here, only about 400 are estimated to have actually died in the Great Chicago Fire. But still, I want to paint a picture of you and just how hellish it would have been to have been caught in these flames, because the fire started about a half mile off to our right there, but it spread so rapidly that these flames quickly reached heights over 100 feet high into the air. Most of the buildings in Chicago were made out of wood at the time, so they were just continuing to feed this fire. The fire created its own tornado-like winds that basically produced these fire funnel clouds ripping through all of downtown Chicago back then. This thing was just hell on earth, and the people of Chicago were caught in it. Well, given the scale of destruction we're talking about here, it's probably not a stretch to assume that there's quite a few ghost stories involved with the Great Chicago Fire, and there is. But I think the unique aspect about them is that a lot of them involve buildings that were not destroyed by the fire, but actually some of the few that still stood afterwards. One of them was Holy Family Church, which was located just a few blocks away from where the fire started. Supposedly, the night of the fire, Father Damon, who was inside, decided to stay with the church and pray for its survival. Well, apparently the power of prayer worked out pretty well for him, because the church was untouched by the flames and continued to stand, and his ghost has been attested to have still been at the church to this day, continuing to protect it with that power of prayer. He's also been seen at the nearby Catholic school, so depending on your opinion of priests, maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing. I don't know. I'll leave that up to your personal opinions. But anyway, beyond that, there's a building on the south side of downtown on the Magnificent Mile, the very northern end of it, where there's got this building called the Chicago Water Tower. This was actually one of the old pumping stations that supplied water to the fire hydrants in the city back then. Well, the night of the fire, there was a man manning those pumps, and as these flames continued to get ever closer, he did the bravest thing possible and continued to man those pumps, even as the flames completely surrounded the water tower. Well, the water tower was made out of stone, but it was either going to be the smoke, the intense heat, or maybe the flames getting inside to the wooden structures on the inside. Eventually, this thing was going to kill this guy, and he knew it. So he climbed to the very top of the water tower and hung himself up there on the top level. Well, fast forward to the 1990s, and there's a group of tourists over there by the water tower. They have a look up near the top of the Chicago Water Tower here. They can see through the top window, and they're so convinced that they see someone who's hung themselves up there that they get the attention of a nearby police officer who sees the same thing. So given that he thinks someone has hung himself up there at the top of the water tower, he runs up there, blasts through the doorway, and there's no one there. No one had hung themselves up there on that day, but it sure looked like it. That guy, I guess he's still continuing his climb up those steps to the top of the water tower and hanging himself. Not a very glamorous way to go out, but he sure was probably the bravest person in the city that night. So, for what it's worth, he did his job, but ultimately it was to no avail. The Great Chicago Fire was not stopped at all by the fire hydrants or the fire department that year. It just went on until it ran out of the city to continue destroying.
Hey, Lori.
But okay, this next one's one of my favorites. It's actually a classic Chicago ghost story. And this one starts on Archer Avenue on the southwest side. I want you to imagine yourself driving along Archer Avenue here. It's late. You see a young woman hitchhiking along the side of the road. She appears to be a little disheveled. As you get closer, you notice she's kind of in distress. Looks a little scared, upset. One of those two, any one of those. Either way, you feel bad for her. You know, you want to get home, it's late, but you know, this girl looks like she's in trouble. So you pull up, you offer her a ride, and she hops in. Well, Well, you ask her where she wants to go. She gives you an address and you think nothing of it. So you start driving along. This girl, she's dressed all in white. She's looking a little tense, but as the ride is going on, she starts to let her guard down a little bit. You have yourselves a nice little pleasant conversation. But then you pull up to the address that she gave you, and you find that it's a cemetery, Resurrection Cemetery. You look out the window and you're like, are you sure this is where you want me to drop you off? And she says, yeah, this is great, this is where I live. You're just like, okay, if you're sure. So you look back out at the cemetery, and then as soon as you look back to where she was sitting, she's not there anymore. She disappears. You didn't hear the door close or open. You didn't see her run off into the cemetery. She's just gone. That's because you were just talking to the ghost of Resurrection Mary. The story behind her goes all the way back to the 1930s. Apparently, she'd left a dance hall near Resurrection Cemetery and was killed in a car accident that night. And ever since then, she's been trying to get home from the dance hall, but she always ends up at Resurrection Cemetery instead of her actual house. This one is a real classic Chicago story. You'll hear multiple iterations of it told certain different ways. It's one of my favorites, and it's a great little experience to maybe go down there on Archer Avenue very late at night and see if you spot her, if you have the guts to do it. But that's definitely one of those stories here in Chicago that's come into basically legendary status now. All right, so this next one actually involves the boating industry, and a guy we'll call Captain D. Captain D came on the scene here in the 1990s. He started up a whole new tour company out of seemingly nowhere. Back in the 90s, the Chicago River was not the nice, navigable, recreational river you can see today. It doesn't smell too bad most of the time. You can kayak in it. People will eat on the banks of the river. It's great. Back in the 90s, though, it was still pretty disgusting. There were far less tour boats, far less recreational boats, and not a soul would be willing to kayak on it back in those days. Well, in the midst of this, being only a few tour companies at the time, Captain D comes out of nowhere. But that wasn't eyebrow-raising enough. There were some rumors back then that the docking locations of boats on the river had some mob connections. Well, you couple that with Captain D's sudden appearance and his very aggressive marketing tactics, and there were quite a few raised eyebrows indeed as soon as he came on the scene. He got his start by buying this old Chicago fireboat and converting it into a tour boat. And then he started to expand quickly as his aggressive marketing tactics
maybe I didn't
actually
recognize
kind of
your
played
number.
to his favor. He would
Call from
disparage the
different number.
competition, saying that their boats
I
weren't
might be
seaworthy.
downstairs with my
His tours were
landlady.
the only 90-minute tours on the river,
I
even
was
though that's long been the standard.
watching Israel.
Well, as soon as the other
his live,
companies
he was
clapped
doing a
back,
live from
he would say that
Montreal
these
Beach.
more established big guys are trying to pick on the little guy and put him down where he's just trying to get his start here on the river. It worked out. His company quickly expanded to include multiple tour boats, water taxis. He was living the high life here as a new company owner of a tour boat company here in the great city of Chicago. But then rumors started to swirl that Captain D was facing financial difficulties. One morning, he's on his way into work, and just like he'd always done, he approached a set of railroad tracks on his commute. This time, though, a train was passing by, so he had to wait at the railroad crossing for the train to pass. As he's sitting there in his car, a guy walks up to him, points a gun at his head, and blah, 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 just like that. 3 shots into his chest, 1 in the head. Captain D is slain right there, waiting at the railroad tracks inside of his car. The police open an investigation, of course. They plead with the public for any tips on what might have happened, but ultimately they're very upfront about what they think happened. They say it was a hit, plain and simple, and we're never going to catch the guy. And they never did. His murder was never solved. His company was quickly dissolved, all of its assets sold off. That fireboat that he got his start with is actually still cruising the Chicago River to this day. You might spot it every now and then. You can even book a tour on it if you'd like to, though they're one of our competitors, so don't do that. But either way, just as quickly as his company had appeared, it was now gone. And while there's no ghost story involved here with Captain D, I do think his tale is sort of like a cautionary tale that still looms over the Chicago River to this day about how to open an honest business and not one that involves mob connections, because it never is going to end well for you. They always come to collect, and if you don't got the money to pay them with, well, you're going to end up just like Captain D did, dead alongside some railroad tracks. So now we're in the 1890s. The World's Fair is in town. The 1893 World's Fair, the World's Columbian Exposition it was called because it celebrated 400 years since Christopher Columbus sailed to the New World. It's here in Chicago. You're a small town person. You want to go to Chicago not only to see this extravagant World's Fair, but also because Chicago at this time is 20 years removed from the Great Chicago Fire. Its rebuild has been miraculous. It is a city now of opportunity where you can make it big and get rich here in the big city. So given you're a small town person, the big city lights are alluring you, you make your way to Chicago, leaving your family behind for the very first time. You arrive at a train station south of the city around 63rd Street. As you're getting off, you see an advertisement for the World's Fair Hotel. Well, you're like, this is great. I'm here for the World's Fair. This hotel appears to be connected to the World's Fair in some way. I'll stay there. So you make your way to the World's Fair Hotel. Looks a little unremarkable, maybe a little dingy, kind of not what you were expecting. But nonetheless, you check in, and the guy at the front desk, oh boy, is he charming. He's got a well-groomed mustache, and he's really laying on the suave character thing. This guy's great. He seems like a guy you could really trust. Well, he takes your bags, helps you carry them to your room upstairs. You notice the hallways in this place are a little confusing, almost labyrinthian. There appears to be some doors in kind of weird places. They don't appear to be hotel rooms. I don't know, there's a lot of janitor closets here, a little bit too many to be normal, but whatever. It's not that expensive. This guy's really nice. You're gonna spend the night here at the World's Fair Hotel. Well, after he lets you into your room, he walks out and you're feeling pretty tired. You've been traveling all day. So you lay down in your bed and you're about to drift off into La La Land when you start to hear some hissing in your room. And then you notice that there's some gas jets filling your entire room with some kind of weird gas. But before you can really even react to it, you immediately begin to feel extra drowsy and you start to lose consciousness. You stumble back to your bed, hoping that whatever it is will pass, but it only gets worse. And just before you completely lose consciousness, you notice your door has opened and that same guy that had led you to your room is standing there waiting for you to pass out. Next thing you know, you're on an examination table, your body's being dissected and ultimately sold off to medical examiners to conduct their medical experiments. What had just happened to you was that you had not checked into the World's Fair Hotel. You had checked into H.H. Holmes' Murder Castle, America's first serial killer who was operating here in Chicago during the World's Fair of 1893. H.H. Holmes had more than just murder to his resume. He was adept in insurance fraud. He loved taking life insurance policies out on people, getting them nicely close to the point where they'd be willing to sign their life away to this guy. That's how trustworthy he appeared to be, how charming he was. But as soon as he had those people close, sometimes he'd even marry women, and once he had their life savings, he would have them killed and take out that policy, earn all that money. He amassed quite a fortune. That's how he built this hotel that operated during the World's Fair, and ultimately it's believed he may have killed as many as 200 people. Eventually, his acts caught up to him, though not here in Chicago. He was arrested in Boston in 1894, and it was for the murder of his business partner who he had killed and taken the life insurance policy out on. So he was initially arrested not for his murder, though, but for that insurance fraud. Later they find out that he also murdered the guy. He was on trial in Philadelphia where he admitted to killing 27 people. But the thing about H.H. Holmes is he was never honest at all about himself. A lot of the people he claimed to have killed were later found to be alive, or the day they actually died did not line up with what Holmes had said. He's a guy of great mystery. A lot of the stories about him are probably sensationalized. There's just not a whole lot of facts. The police work involving his case was pretty terrible, considering how many people he killed and for how long he was operating. No one ever suspected him of anything other than credit and insurance fraud. The only reason they found out that he murdered anybody was because they arrested him for insurance fraud, but it took years before anyone even really became suspicious of him for that. Well, H.H. Holmes left his mark on Chicago in more ways than just those murders and fraud. The Murder Castle eventually would become the site of a post office. What a great place to get your mail from. Well, that site has been pretty infested with terrible things that happened there back in the 1890s. That whole area is just giving off quite an aura of oppressiveness. Some people have said they've heard just blood-curdling screams emanating from that area. Eventually, the Murder Castle was knocked down, and a new building was built there, though it is still a post office to this day. Needless to say, nobody wants to go in the basement of that post office, even the new one that stands on that site now. But all right, from one murderous hotel to another, let's talk about the Congress Plaza Hotel. This is a pretty nice hotel. Maybe you've stayed there, maybe you've heard of it. But just like with the murder castle, if you check into the Congress Plaza Hotel, you're probably getting more than you bargained for. This hotel is widely regarded as the most haunted in the entire country. It actually supposedly inspired Stephen King to write not just The Shining, but also 1408, after his time spent staying there. So if you check into the Congress Plaza Hotel, pretty much everywhere you look, you're going to find some place with some weird stuff happening. Maybe you're checking into your room. You find it's room 441. Well, lucky you, you just checked into the most haunted room in the entire hotel. It's home to not only demons and spirits, but also poltergeists, very aggressive spirits who just like to hurl things all over the place. Anyone who's seen the movie Poltergeist will also know they like to create portals to other dimensions inside TVs. Beyond that, though, there's an old lady whose spirit will haunt you in that room. Usually she'll just sort of hover at the foot of your bed while you're trying to sleep. You've already had it with all these poltergeists throwing your stuff all over the place. You don't even want to acknowledge this lady, you just want to get some sleep. But that's where you've made your mistake here. What makes her angry is if you don't acknowledge her. She'll start shaking your bed, pulling your sheets, yelling at you. You might as well have just not checked into that room at all, because it is just not one place you're going to get any sleep whatsoever. Well, maybe the next morning, tired, bags under your eyes, you go to the gold room. It's a ballroom where a lot of private events were held. There's a grand piano in there. Great place to get some photos. Maybe you're with some friends. You take a photo, and then you find a lot of your friends that were in the photo you thought are missing. There's just an empty space where they were standing. This phenomenon has been witnessed by a lot of people taking photos there in the gold room, especially by that grand piano. But I think the most tragic story connected with the Congress Plaza Hotel involves a young boy about 6 years old. He was visiting, well, he wasn't visiting, he came here with his mom and his younger brother, 4.5 years old, from the Czech Republic in 1939. They came to Chicago to escape Nazi oppression. But unfortunately, their father and his mom's husband were he was unable to make the journey. He was stuck back there in Europe while they came here to Chicago to escape the Nazis. Well, this process of leaving her home country behind, trying to escape the Nazis, and having to leave her husband as well back in Europe, not knowing what would happen to him if she'd ever see him again. This whole process left, Carl Langer is the boy's name, by the way, left Mrs. Langer just distraught. And apparently, it pretty much broke her psyche as well. Well, one morning, Mrs. Langer decides, okay, well, it's a nice day. Let's go to the zoo. Let's go to Lincoln Park Zoo. It's a free zoo here in Chicago, and it's a beautiful day. Let's go see the animals at Lincoln Park Zoo. So she dresses her kids up in their best clothing. They go over to Lincoln Park Zoo. They see the elephants. They see the rhinos, the lions. They get some ice cream. It's a beautiful morning. Well, then it's time to go back to the Congress Plaza Hotel where they're staying. As she walks into the room, she's like, oh boy, it's a little stuffy in here. She opens up a window on their 12th floor room, and then she's like, oh, it's a little crowded in here too. She promptly throws both of her sons out that 12th floor window, and then throws herself out as well. All three of them die as soon as they hit the pavement 12 floors down. This story grabs media attention, obviously, for how tragic it was. This murder-suicide Mrs. Langer conducted. But the reason that Carl Langer's ghost here in particular is the one that's usually seen and not his younger 4.5-year-old brother is because the media attention surrounding what happened often focused on his younger brother and not Carl himself. So maybe he feels a little bit left out, a little bit forgotten by the people back then and still to this day. So he's the one that's seen running around the halls of the hotel. One time he even followed one of the employees home. I think he just wants someone to tell him everything's going to be okay. So, of all the ghosts you can see at the Congress Plaza Hotel, if you see the ghost of Carl Langer, just hang out with him for a bit because he's not going to do you any harm, unlike many of the other ghosts you might find in that hotel. But all right, folks, here is my second and also final break of the cruise. I'll be back on in a few minutes, so enjoy this time here on the South Branch for a bit without me talking in your ear. And then I'll be back with the last portion of our tour after a short break. And trust me, some of the best stories are still to come, some of my favorites, and we'll get there very shortly.
Okay, guys. Let's see if I could get something to drink. So. Let's see what we could do. last of this. So let's go back.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's a fucking minute for you.
Sorry about that. I didn't say that.
Beyond the stars,
You guys, we should do some type of food. When you guys are over here in Chicago, it's really nice. I don't consider it that fancy at all. Maybe something to do.
oh, Jiminy
One day.
Christmas, folks, it's the Mothman. He's up there, I can see him. You can all see him, right?
Yeah,
oh my God,
oh
if you're
yeah.
downstairs, get up
He's
here
gonna
right now.
jump.
We're all
He's gonna
seeing the
jump.
Mothman.
Yeah,
Oh, he's
he's
taking
gonna
off.
jump.
Oh, he's gone. He's gone. If you were downstairs, you didn't see it. Oh my gosh. We actually saw the Mothman. I knew he was going to make an appearance. All of you saw it. If you were downstairs, ask anybody in the crowd. They'll tell you the exact same story. Oh, brother. Right, really got your money's worth tonight, folks. That is crazy. But okay, let's continue. Maybe we'll see him again. I don't know. This next bit of Chicago history here involves a boat, but not just any boat. This boat was called the Medusa Challenger. What a sick name, don't you think? But either that, but beyond the name, this thing was massive. It was probably the largest boat to ever come along the Chicago River here. This thing was 500 feet long. It was a huge barge. It wasn't just long, it was also very tall. We had the bridges to open for it. And it would get tugged along the river by some smaller tugs to make sure it didn't hit anything. But here's the thing. Whenever the Medusa Challenger came to town, something would always go wrong. Either wood hit some of these bridge houses here, or the walls of the river walks here, or sometimes when it was waiting for these bridges to open for it, well, they would either get stuck closed, or when they did open, they would then get stuck in the open position. Every single time this thing came to town, something like this would go wrong. It was later called the Jinx ship because it was just such a disaster for the city every single time it came down the river. This didn't happen in any other city the Medusa Challenger visited. Nothing ever went wrong there. It was just Chicago. Except for one day. That one day when the Medusa Challenger came to town and nothing went wrong though, was a Friday the 13th, just like tonight.
Like tonight.
So, given that nothing went wrong on that particular day, that doesn't tell you there was something weird going on with the Medusa. I don't know what does. Well, that ship stopped coming to Chicago in the 1970s. But the other thing about it was, not only was it tall, it also had a very deep draft. Like I told you before, the Chicago River is not that deep, 18 to 24 feet at its deepest. Well, this boat was deep enough that it would actually cut through the riverbed of the Chicago River. As it did that, it would unleash whatever was buried there at the banks, at the bottom of the river here. Well, the Marine Police knew they would have their work cut out for them every time the Medusa Challenger came to town, because one of the things that the Medusa Challenger would unleash from the bottom of the river was human corpses. As it would cruise along, human corpses would float to the surface behind it, and the Marine Police would promptly collect those bodies. This thing was just kind of a nightmare for the city of Chicago, so I'm sure everyone was very happy when it stopped showing up in the 1970s. So we talked about the Great Chicago Fire, right? And that was obviously a very big disaster for the city, but one interesting thing about the fire as it relates to this next story is that the Great Chicago Fire was not the most deadly fire in Chicago history. In fact, the most deadly fire in Chicago history was a single building fire. That was the Iroquois Theater fire of 1903. The Iroquois Theater, first of all, when it opened, was touted as one of the most modern and fire-safe theaters, ironically, in the country. So imagine yourself here, hearing an ad for the Iroquois Theater. They're putting on a show, the musical it's your favorite. And this theater sounds great. It's modern. It's got air conditioning, which back then was a block of ice and a big fan. Either way, it was better than nothing. And we decided, okay, we're Mr. Bluebeard at the Iroquois Theater. This is going to be a great night. You get a seat on the upper decks, got a great view of the stage. This is hilarious. It's great. This is an awesome time. But something is happening backstage that you're not aware of, at least not immediately. The stage lamp has fallen over and it's caught fire. The curtains catch fire. The props backstage, which are quite flammable, they catch fire. This fire spreads to the front of the stage, and now the crowd is very well aware of what's going on here. Well, as the fire continues to spread quite alarmingly fast, the people working at the Iroquois are doing a pretty terrible job controlling the panic. Things get out of hand in a hurry. Crowds flood towards what they think are fire exits, only to find them barred and locked shut. People on the upper decks, they think there might be some fire escapes. No, there are no fire escapes. You're on the top deck. You think, okay, well, I'll just go take the stairway I used to get up here. But then you find the stairway is just clogged with people trampling each other to death. There's no way down. You're trapped up there. Then you see there's a window. Well, you know you're a few floors up, but you think maybe I could survive the fall. So that's the route you take. You jump out that window, but just like 150 people who did the very same thing, you fall to your death. And while 150 people fell to their death, over 600 in total are killed in the Iroquois Theater Fire of 1903. Until 9/11, this was the single most deadly single building disaster in United States history. So this was a huge, huge disaster for the city of Chicago. And obviously with 600 deaths, quite a few of those souls remain restless. One of them is that of Nellie Reed. She was actually part of the musical comedy. She was an actor, meant to swing over the crowd, suspended on a cable, dropping flowers as part of that performance. Well, as this fire is raging, she falls from her perch above the crowd, the cable snaps, and either the fall kills her or she's consumed by the flames. Well, there's another theater that stands on the site where the Iroquois once stood. It's called the Nederlander Theater, and her ghost has been seen flying around on the upper levels of that theater, probably still hoping that one day she might get to complete her performance. These trains are hard to complete. But then we get to the alleyway where you decided to jump to the death. Well, given that 150 people jumped to their death in this alleyway behind the Iroquois Theater, this alleyway has been affectionately dubbed Death Alley. Well, we're going to pretend now that you're a different person entirely. Not one that got consumed in the flames or fell to their death in Death Alley, but now you're in the present day. And you see this alleyway behind the Nederlander Theater, which stands there now, and you think, okay, I need to get to the other side. I don't want to go around the corner. I'll just use this alleyway as a shortcut. Well, as you're walking down Death Alley, which you don't know is Death Alley at the time, you start feeling somebody tugging on your ankles. Well, you're looking and there's nobody there. But still, it feels like somebody's grabbing your ankles. This is a feeling that a lot of people have felt walking through that alleyway. Sometimes they'll also hear screams emanating from within the alley or from the theater itself. This alley is just not a good place to take a shortcut. I wouldn't recommend it, especially at a time like this. But that fire certainly did change building codes right afterwards. We have a lot more fireproof theaters these days, like the Nederlander, so if you ever catch a show there, I think you can feel comfortable that you're not going to get consumed in flames, just like those people at the Iroquois did. Nonetheless, that fire truly was quite disastrous, and it's left a pretty big mark on Chicago and building codes. So now we're getting very close here to where the Eastland sank, and just like I said earlier, I'm going to talk to you all about what happened now. So the SS Eastland, huge passenger vessel, large enough that it would have basically fit underneath two bridges at once here. And I'll point out where it was docked again once we pass it. But it was here in Chicago, part of three boats in total that were chartered in the summer of 1915 to take employees of the Western Electric Company to Michigan City, Indiana for a company picnic. Well, these people were all dressed up in their Sunday best, thinking they're going to have a nice off day on company time, on company money, and having a great picnic. Over 1,000 of these employees are boarding the SS Eastland in particular, but the Eastland is notorious for its top heaviness. But this is actually made worse after the Titanic sinks. After that, new regulations are put in place that require more lifeboats on large vessels. Well, these new lifeboats that are put on the Eastland are put on the top deck, only making its top heaviness worse. So as over 1,000 people are boarding the Eastland that day in 1915, the boat begins to slowly list to its port side, towards the river. And this right here is where the Eastland was docked. This section of the river walk back in 1915. So this thing is listing, and people start to notice, oh boy, Eastland is listing, and this is not good. So they make some efforts to try and right the vessel, but they all fail. And almost as if in slow motion, the Eastland completely capsizes, trapping hundreds of people below deck who drown. Others are crushed by furniture that was not secured to the deck, and 844 are lost in total. One of the largest maritime disasters in United States history. And it happened right here in the 24-foot deep waters of the Chicago River. It's kind of crazy to think that 844 people died right here. Well, all those bodies, as they're being recovered, they're being sent to temporary morgues all around this area. One of those morgues would later be turned into a nightclub. So I'm sure there's some of you out there that like frequenting nightclubs. Maybe you're at this nightclub here, having yourself a good time. Then you look at one of the upper levels, and you see a girl up there, a young girl dressed in pretty peculiar clothing, looks almost early 20th century, and she's up there hiding behind the railing, looking right at you, but she's got tears in her eyes. Well, she was probably one of those victims that were put there in that temporary morgue before the nightclub moved into that location. Employees of that nightclub have said that they've heard arguments on the top floor, and then the sounds of broken glass. Whenever they go up there to check it out, they don't find anybody who is up there arguing, but they do find broken glass on the floor. This has happened multiple times. So maybe that actually sort of entices you to go check out the nightclub. I don't remember the name though off the top of my head, but feel free. I'm sorry. I should probably remember that one. It slipped my mind tonight though. I'll learn it next time. You'll just have to take the cruise all over again, and then I'll tell you the nightclub is. Anyway, the Eastland disaster, just like the Iroquois Theater fire, did a whole lot to change the safety regulations of vessels. So I'm happy to say that our boat is not at all top heavy, and you don't have to worry about us listening slowly to ports after which all of you would wreck. It's kind of morbid, I know, but it's not going to happen, so it's okay. All right, so now I want to talk to you about relationships and sort of like the content of relationships, right? Because it's kind of weird. What's going on inside a relationship? It's kind of like what's going on inside of a sausage. What's in there? I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. Well, in the 1800s, 1890s specifically, there was a guy here in Chicago that had earned himself the moniker of the Sausage King because he had found unparalleled success in the sausage-making industry. He was on top of the world. People were buying his sausages left and right. These things taste great. I don't know what's inside of them, but boy, do they taste good. But then one day, the sales are not quite as good as they used to be. The Sausage King finds that people are just not buying sausages like he had always expected them to do. He's distraught. He can't figure it out. Well, he obsesses over his formula, trying to perfect it, but to no avail. Things start to affect the home life. He's now white. And by the way, this guy, I should have mentioned off the top. His name was Adolf Lutgert. With a name like Adolf, you know he's a standout guy. But his wife, Louisa, he and him are arguing night after night. He's spending so much time at the factory trying to perfect his formula. He's not paying attention to her. He's not paying attention to their kids. He's never there. Well, he's had enough of her. He's just decided to sleep at the factory and never, ever go home. He spends long nights in the basement working on these vats down there, trying to perfect his sausage formula. The night watchman gets a little curious. He's like, what is Adolf doing down there in the wee hours of the night when he should be at home with his wife? Well, whenever he tries to go inspect what Adolf is working on, he shoos him away. Doesn't want him to get too close. Well, the night watchman brings this information to the daytime workers, and they tell him all about some weird instructions Adolf is giving them about chemical experiments and some specific cleaning instructions for those vats in the basement. This is all very odd, but then one day, Mrs. Lutgert turns up missing. But Adolf says she's gone to visit her sisters. Well, her sisters say, that's not true. She never said she was coming to visit, and she never arrived. What's going on, Adolf? Where's your wife? He's coming up with some more explanations, and they all begin to ring very hollow. So finally, the police are called, and they conduct a very thorough investigation of his factory. As they're dismantling the machinery, they find human bone fragments and a gold wedding band inscribed with the initials LL. We salute there. That's enough, of course, to arrest the Sausage King, and the ensuing trial of the Sausage King grips the nation. Media attention is furious. Everyone wants to know, oh my God, the Sausage King committed murder on his wife, he killed his wife. That's crazy. The media was so eager to get up-to-date information on this case that as the jury was deliberating behind closed doors, they suspended one of their reporters on a chair down a bench shaft to see if they could hear the verdict before it was even delivered in court. Well, this verdict was pretty damning. It seems in Adolf's efforts to perfect his sausage formula, he decided to experiment with a new ingredient. His wife, Louisa Lutgert, he put her in the sausages. Maybe some unlucky souls were the recipients of some of that sausage as he had them taste test it to see if that perfected the formula. Well, I wonder if that's put you all off sausages now, because do we really know what's in there? It's a whole lot of, I don't know. Either way, the Sausage King was promptly locked up. His factory was closed down, though it wasn't knocked down. Eventually, it was turned into residential units, so people now live in the Sausage King's factory where he turned his wife into sausage. And supposedly, her ghost is still inside that factory to this day, though she's usually kind of just hanging around. Nothing usually crazy going on there, but certainly her soul is having a hard time finding rest, given that she was turned into sausages. But at least her husband did receive justice for what he had done. Up ahead here, we got one more bridge to go under, and then we'll be as far as we go out towards Lake Michigan. So that'll be our turnaround point there right before we head back to the Lake Michigan, though, is obviously one of the Great Lakes. While it isn't the largest of them, it is the one that has claimed the most shipwrecks. Over 1,500 vessels have been lost to Lake Michigan, more than any other Great Lake. Its waters are notoriously underestimated by many people. They know it's just a lake, it's not going to be that bad, but it actually can get pretty rough out there, many people have discovered. Some people even say that the lake out there has its own version of the Bermuda Triangle, where vessels will disappear, sometimes reappear, or just go unaccounted for under mysterious circumstances. Well, one day, there was a pilot actually who was flying out of an operation that was taking place at Navy Pier during World War II. The pier was actually turned into a naval air station back then for pilots trying to take off from aircraft carriers. While they were doing their training here, this guy was having a flight off to the northern end of the city over the lakefront. But while he was out there, he crashed his plane into the lake, and although his plane was recovered, the pilot never was. But there have been pretty strange reports of a guy dressed in a World War II era flight suit crawling his way out of Lake Michigan on the northern lakefront here, covered all in seaweed, dragging himself to the nearby cemetery on the lakefront over there before disappearing right at its gates. This guy's been called Seaweed Charlie, and he's just continuing to this day to pull himself out of the water, covered all in seaweed, and then still dressed in his very swanky pilot suit. Beyond him, there's a vessel out there called the Lady Elgin that was on a trip from Chicago to Milwaukee in the mid-1800s. The Lady Elgin carried about 400 people aboard, and she was on her way to Milwaukee when she heard a distress call from another vessel called the Augusta. The Augusta was a smaller ship, but it was in a state of distress. Well, they decided, we're nearby, we'll answer the call. As they approached the Augusta, though, the Augusta makes a maneuver the Elgin was not expecting, and it crashes right into the hull of the Elgin, reaching it and allowing water to quickly rush in so fast, in fact, that over 300 people are killed that day as the Elgin sinks to the bottom of Lake Michigan. Well, that area where the Elgin sank is also pretty close to where Seaweed Charlie crashed his plane. But beyond that, a lot of people who have sailed through that spot have noticed people floating in the water there, sometimes just dead already, other times they appear to be in states of distress, begging to be lifted out of the water. But anytime anyone gets close, they just disappear right before they can almost touch them. Probably victims there of the Lady Elgin, or maybe one of the many other over 1,000 boats that have sank into the depths here of Lake Michigan. There's another very interesting vessel that actually once sailed Lake Michigan here, one you probably couldn't guess. This was a German World War II U-boat submarine that was brought here to Chicago after World War II to be put on display at the Museum of Science and Industry on the southern lakefront. This submarine was operating in the waning days of the war, and the Allies were keen to hunt it down. They were getting very close to basically cornering the submarine, and they hoped to capture it and its crew. But the captain of the U-boat, the U-505, he was not keen to be captured. So as the Allies were closing in, he decided to shoot himself instead. But I guess there's a reason he was a submarine captain and not a rifleman or something, because even though he pointed the gun right at himself, he missed anything vital. He just fell to the deck of the submarine, screaming in pain, begging his crew to do something. What they did was they smothered him with a pillow. They were underwater. The Allies were using sonar to detect the location of the submarine. They were going to see these screams on the sonar, so the crew had really no choice but to silence their captain. Well, once the submarine made its way here to Chicago after being captured, the museum employees have said that the captain of the U-505 is still aboard. They've seen him. But the interesting thing about this captain that they see is that it's only his lower half, basically from the belt down. They just see his trousers and his boots strolling around, usually hanging around near the captain's cabin. And you can actually go there and get a walking tour within the submarine. Maybe you'll see the lower half of this captain. Why it's his lower half is anyone's guess. I have no idea. His story did not involve getting cut in half. He doesn't have a family history of getting cut in half, so I don't know what's going on there. But I hear he has a pretty nice pair of trousers. Maybe you can go compliment him on those. Well, I'll give you a chance if you want. You can get up and take some photos. Feel free to walk around. I know we got a beautiful skyline here in Chicago. I don't want to deprive you of your opportunity to snap some photos of it. I'll just sort of keep talking here in the background. So on Chicago's lakefront, we already mentioned this a little briefly earlier, is a free zoo called Lincoln Park Zoo. One thing that a lot of people may not know about Lincoln Park Zoo, though, is that it used to be the primary cemetery of Chicago. This was back around the Great Chicago Fire times. Well, as the fire destroyed most of the north side of the city, as it ripped through Lincoln Park, where Lincoln Park Zoo is now located, the cemetery there had all wooden grave markers. So these grave markers were completely destroyed in the Great Chicago Fire. Well, a little bit later on, the city didn't really want a cemetery there anymore. They wanted to convert it more into parkland, build a zoo. Well, they had to go through and remove all those corpses and reinterment them in other cemeteries. But given the fact that a lot of those grave sites were completely left unmarked now, they had a pretty big challenge in finding all those bodies buried there. So much so that they probably didn't recover them all. So if you're ever walking through Lincoln Park, which is a very nice place to go for a walk, of course, or you're walking through the zoo, keep in mind that there might be some dead bodies right under your feet that they failed to uncover during their efforts of turning that cemetery into a nice place to hang out, maybe take your kids, playing a nice game of soccer on the field. Little do you know, there's corpses right underneath your kids' feet. Beyond that, though, there's a statue of Ulysses S. Grant in Lincoln Park. Ironically, there's a statue of Abraham Lincoln in Grant Park. Sort of an interesting quirk there in Chicago. But this statue sits prominently sort of on a little plaza. He's up there on his high horse holding a sword in the air. Well, apparently on one stormy day, a group of 11 or so people sought shelter underneath the statue. So you can sort of go underneath in this little almost temple-like looking structure. Well, they went there to get out of the rain, but the lightning was also pretty intense that night. And despite being underneath that statue, all 11 people were struck and killed by the lightning, and ultimately they all perished there underneath Ulysses S. Grant. Well, that site, you can still of course visit it today, but a lot of people have reported very cold feelings as they walk past Ulysses these days, probably from those restless souls, those people struck by lightning as they try to take shelter. But the president of the United States failed to protect them that day, and I suggest you probably don't want to take shelter from lightning underneath Grant if you find yourself caught in a storm over there. Okay. Whew, my voice is starting to fail me, but we're almost done, so it's okay. As we head back towards our dock here, I got one more story I want to leave you with. And this one is one of my favorites, if not my favorite, just because I feel like it's a great way to cap this whole cruise off. This story involves a family known as the Andrews. This time, only a husband and wife. Maybe they wanted kids at some point, but you'll find that they never got there. Either way, the Andrews are invited to a cocktail party at the Sheraton Hotel. And these days it's called the Intercontinental Hotel. I'll point it out. It'll be right across from our dock. Well, they get an invitation to this cocktail party. Now, Mr. Andrews in particular is not a heavy drinker. He doesn't really drink at all. But nonetheless, he likes parties. He likes schmoozing at the guests, learning the gossip, all that good stuff. So he decides to go with his wife to the cocktail party. But then on the day of the party, he falls ill. So ill that his wife suggests maybe they don't go. But he's insistent. He wants to learn the latest gossip. I don't care how sick I am. I'm going to this party. So they head there, they park their car, or they give it to the valet who parks their car. They head up to the event space of the hotel. They're schmoozing up the guests, but as the night is going on, Mr. Andrews' condition is only getting worse and worse. Once it's time to leave the party, his condition is just about as bad as it could be. It looks like he's just about to die. That's how bad he is. He's got a flop sweat. He's just feeling very weak and sort of disoriented. You might have thought he was drunk, but no, he was just very, very ill. Well, as he approaches the valet with his wife to get his car back, the valet driver is very hesitant to give him his keys. He thinks, "Sir, you're in no condition to drive. You look terrible." His wife agrees. She says, "You know what, I'll drive, or we don't have to go home tonight. We can stay at the hotel." But no, Mr. Andrews is a very stubborn guy. He insists, "I can drive us home. I'm driving. I'm getting behind the wheel." The last thing anyone sees of the Andrews, they speed off heading south along Michigan Avenue on the lower level of it, going across the Chicago River on the Michigan Avenue Bridge. The screeching of their tires is heard. They apparently turned left onto Lower Wacker Drive, this elevated sort of road system we have here alongside the river off to our left. And then they're never seen again. No one ever sees the Andrews ever again, neither them nor their car. Well, given that the last place they were heard or seen was right here near the Chicago River, the first thought everybody had was, well, they must have somehow driven off the road and ended up in the Chicago River. Back then, it was a lot more precarious than it is now. There really wasn't any barriers right there, so it really would have been really easy to drive straight into the river if you lost control. So of course, naturally, they think that's what happened. So they start conducting some dives here in the Chicago River to see if they can find the Andrews car. But every time they do it, they find nothing. And like I said before, the river's not that deep, so there really couldn't have been so many places this thing could be hiding. Nonetheless, they don't find any sign of their car. Time goes on, the case goes cold. Well, then in the 80s, they start to wonder, maybe we should try and reopen this case. Maybe if we conduct some new dives, we'll find something. So around 1980, they conduct some more dives in the Chicago River. This time, they find no less than 12 cars submerged in the Chicago River, but crazily enough, none of them match the description of the Andrews Oldsmobile. They start to wonder, well, maybe as time has gone on, if the Andrews did it up in the Chicago River, it's possible, given how shallow the river is, a boat would have pushed their car further out. But either way, they still find no trace of the Andrews. Then they get a tip from out in the suburbs. Somebody says there's a car submerged in a pond out there that matches the Andrews car's description. They conduct some dives there. Still nothing. They find no trace of the Andrews, and ever since then, this case has gone completely cold. No one knows at all where the Andrews end up. And by the way, the Intercontinental Hotel, which is the Sheraton, when the Andrews went there, is going to come into view off to our right here. So it's you see the Tribune Tower right there on the left between these buildings. On the right, the one with the dome-shaped roof, was where the Andrews went to that cocktail party. So they leave the hotel, they head south, which is off to our left there, crossing the next bridge after this one on the lower level. They apparently turn left onto Wacker Drive, this lower level of the road system off to our left there, after which no one knows what happened. So given that they turned left onto Wacker Drive, most likely right there, right where our dock is, it's quite possible that where the Andrews ended up is right where our boat is about to come into dock. So as you're leaving tonight, which you're about to be headed off here, we're about to return to our dock, I want you to keep in mind that the Andrews may still be buried somewhere at the bottom of the Chicago River, right under here, right underneath your very feet. That's one of those great mysteries of the Chicago River and Chicago in general, one of those things we're never really going to know all the answers to, but it's a great way to sort of have your imagination run wild and wonder what the heck happened to the Andrews family. But okay, folks, that is all I have for you. This is a good time to start collecting all your belongings. Make sure you're not leaving anything behind, like phones, keys, wallets, purses, whatever it is. If you accumulated any trash, we always appreciate you helping us out. We got bins all over the place, upstairs, downstairs. There'll be one on the dock too. So if you can help us out by disposing of that, we'd really appreciate it. And I especially would, because I'm the one that has to clean it up after you leave. Beyond that, though, if you enjoyed this cruise, we always appreciate your feedback too online. Whatever platform you want to use, Yelp, TripAdvisor, Google, you name it, whatever is most convenient for you, we're happy to hear your feedback. you want to mention me, your humble tour guide in your review, I'm always happy for a shout out to. My name is Nick, if you forgot. If you didn't like the cruise and you want to leave negative feedback, that's perfectly fine. But in that case, I was never here and you got your tour from Ned. I'm going to be there on the dock though as you're disembarking. If you got any final questions or comments for me, I'm always happy to chat. Otherwise, stay where you're at for now. The captain will let you know when it's safe to disembark. Appreciate listening to me yab at you this whole time. I hope you enjoyed my commentary, and thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your night. Thanks.
Okay, guys, we finished the tour. Thank you for being in, for staying in my live stream. Just trying to do something a little bit different. But tomorrow we're going to the real business, right? So I'm gonna try to see if he could talk to the live stream. So we'll see. I have a good time. I hope you guys do too. It was nice. It was very nice. First time I do this type of local cruise. I have done all the local cruise, but not like this. I've been for event, but this is something relaxed, something really nice. I encourage people to do it. It's very nice. It's like a chill time. So it's nice.
All right, everyone. The gateway's in place. You guys are good to go. On behalf of Chicago's First Lady Cruises, we thank you guys for choosing us. Please enjoy the rest of your day. Have a good one.
Let's see, I could have him say some word for the live stream.
I know. I was like, oh,
Thank you so much.
No worries.
Do you mind to say some word to encourage people to come to this group? I love it.
You want me to say some
I'm
words?
a YouTuber, so I have friends from all over the
Hey,
place.
I was raised.
kinda.
Oh yeah? I could give you a shout
My
out.
grandfather used to go take
Cool.
So I'm live streaming since I started.
Do you want?
Thank you, Nick. You're
Alright,
the
no worries.
best.
Yes.
Slay.
There you go.
Glad to
Did
hear it.
did you hear, guys? Yeah, he's the best.
Hey, oh yeah, I'm the best. I'm the
So
best.
just encourage to come to this crew.
Yeah, no, we're having a great time here, talking about creepy stuff.
Nice job.
Nice work.
Thank you.
See, guys? Yeah. it's
Chicago's
good.
known for its architecture, of course, but it's also got a lot of creepy, weird stories, and I'm happy to share it with the world.
Thank you so much.
Hey, have a great night.
Great job.
Thank you. Have a
Okay.
good one.
Okay, you too. Okay, guys, did you hear it? That's Nick, and I really encourage people to come to this local cruise. It's nice, it's relaxing, and it's fun. It's really fun. It's really, and then you see the city, you see those stories, those legends, whatever you want to call it. But it's really nice. I have a great time. So I really encourage you guys to come and do the cruise too. So I'm gonna be hitting out. I was planning to go to the or I don't know what time is it, because I cannot see in the chat. But then I think I will leave it for another day. You know what I mean? Corn, I'm gonna be there, when. So anyway, I'm gonna hit it home. So because I want to prepare some stuff, I got all my energy bank ready. So for tomorrow, I got some water. So then I really have a good time. I really, wow, I'm pumped up for tomorrow. It's a great day, you know what I mean? I got the bag, the little bag that I offer, yeah. Hell, I can't even think. I just have one glass of wine anyway. But I will be there, those who know, I will be there tomorrow. So it's going to be fun. And the Mexican people are really out of town. They just, with the flag, they having a good time. Tomorrow I bet it's going to be awesome too. So anyway, I'm going to be heading home. So thank you those who stick with me. Thank you so much. So I'm going to sign out right now so I could head home. So you have a wonderful night. And whoever knows that's going to be there tomorrow, I see you tomorrow. Currently, you could send me a text to see what time you're going to be there so I could hit it all at that time, okay? You have a wonderful, wonderful, pleasant night. Good night, everybody. Oh, let me show you what I was wearing. And of course, that's this one. So I needed to represent. Good night, everybody.